Hey everyone, so in the previous video, you got a simple spawning system working with Liam. Now hazards come falling from the sky to harm the player. In this tutorial, we're going to get the hazards destroying themselves when they actually collide with the player or hit the ground, and we'll also add some environment art. So I've gone ahead and made a few simple white cloud shapes in Photoshop, as well as a rectangle for the ground with a few bumps and cracks. I've also made some mountain shapes, which I'll use to give the scene a little bit more depth. With that done, I'll export these three files as PNGs inside of Unity. With that done, I'll select my clouds file and set the sprite modes to multiple, so I can slice those up inside of the sprite editor, turning each cloud shape into an individual sprite. And now I can drag and drop those different clouds into my scene. I'm going to make sure that my clouds have a very low ordering layer, so that they render behind everything else in my scene. But to avoid typing in large numbers like this to do so, you could also add a sorting layer right here. For example, I'll call this one backgrounds, and now I can move it behind the default sorting layer. This means that objects on the background sorting layer will render behind objects on the default sorting layer, regardless of whether or not they have a higher ordering layer. So I'll set my clouds to the background sorting layer, and just leave its ordering layer with a value of 0, which is cleaner. Now, since this cloud shape is white, I can also easily change its color. What I'll do is select this eyedropper tool, selects the orange background color in the game view, which as you'll see sets my cloud to that exact same orange color, and now darken it up a bit. Note that you can also tweak the object transparency with this alpha slider right here. And now I'll duplicate that cloud with Ctrl D a few times, change the cloud's position, and also change its shape by changing the sprite in the sprite render component. Then I'll drag and drop the ground, and also change its color to something a bit more fitting than this boring white. And lastly, I'll add some mountains, setting those to the background sorting layer and giving them an ordering layer of -1 so that they render behind the clouds. Alright, our scene feels a lot more interesting now. With that done, let's do some simple C# programming to get the hazards destroying themselves when colliding with the player on the ground. So I'll open up the enemy script, and inside of the onTriggerEnter to the function, so if the hazard collides with something, and if that something happens to be the player, then we'll type after the player has taken damage, destroy game object. And this line of code will get the enemy destroying itself. I can hit Ctrl S to save my script and head back to Unity. I'll hit play, and you'll indeed see that when a hazard collides with the player, it's destroyed. Now let's get to destroying itself when it hits the ground. I'll select the ground and add to it a 2D box collider. And of course I'll change its size if need be so that it covers the ground. And then I'll add a 2D rigid body to it, which I'll set to kinematic, so that the ground isn't affected by gravity or some external force. And the reason I'm adding a rigid body to this ground is because, remember, to have objects detect collisions, at least one of the two objects needs to have a rigid body attached to it. And lastly, I'll head up here and add a new tag which I'll call ground, and I'll add that tag to my ground object. This way, inside of my enemy script, I can check whether the object the enemy has just collided with has the ground tag. And if it does, I'll just destroy the enemy, without calling the player's take damage function this time of course, because it wasn't the player who was hit here but the ground. I'll save my script, jump inside of Unity and hit play, and as expected, enemies destroy themselves when they hit the ground. Awesome. And that will mark the end of this video. The next one is an exciting one. In it we'll be creating particle effects for when the hazards destroy themselves, to make the game feel more interesting and fun to watch. So see you then.